Today, we're lucky enough to have Collin Pullar with us. Collin is the president of the Saskatchewan Construction Safety Association. He's been in the role for about 10 years, but before that and during that and into his future, he's just a student of life. We talk a little bit about that. We talk about the willingness that a leader has to have to let go of his ego and actually let people help him grow in his role. And also we hit on mentorship. So this is a great podcast, great ideas and thoughts that you may want to bring into your workplace. Please join us, and I hope you really enjoy it. Welcome, Collin. Thank you so much for joining me on the bridge today. This is really a funny and wonderful conversation we've already had, so I can't wait to get going with the actual interview.
Awesome. Thanks, Dan. I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity. It was wonderful to meet you in a few weeks back and to connect with you. And so, yeah, I've been looking forward to having this conversation here for the last few weeks.
You have a very mixed background in terms of business, and obviously even a foreground, like where you're going is you're just a very diverse person, right? So how did you get involved with the Construction Association? Like, I know what your role right now, you're president, correct?
Yeah. So, kind of the day, job by day, the foremost, the president of the Saskatchewan Construction Safety Association, and they're, just to give context for that, it's an industry-based safety association. In Saskatchewan, we have about 45 to 50 staff, kind of depending on what's going on. And really, they provide services to the industry to help support their planning and risk mitigation. They do education and training, a lot of public awareness to help support the industry and kind of managing the risks. And certification programs and stuff. But and I've been with that organization. They asked me to come on as their president just about 10 years ago. But I worked in government and nonprofit in a more volunteer basis, but in government in kind of emerging through leadership and kind of as a manager, but really kind of at that CEO level position has really been with the association here. And on the volunteer side, kind of been involved in, diverse things in leadership as well. And whether it be with the chamber or actually on board for legal aid today, agriculture societies, I telecommunications. It's kind of been a mixed bag of stuff that you go, this doesn't even make sense. How does it go together? So I've been really kind of fortunate. I look for those opportunities, I guess. And, but it's been kind of a really interesting journey. And sometimes I find myself in spaces scratching my head going, why am I doing this? But I'm having fun learning it. Right. So
yeah,
that's, and I think that's probably a common thread, and all of them have some level of, when I say leadership, trying to help others get better and help myself get better. And at the end, seeing is there something that we can have a positive effect on something that's, it's noble. It's got some benefit to, not just to the people directly involved, but kind of society more broadly. And I think that's been a common thread with all of those, Dan.
When you started 10 years ago with Construction Safety Association, you weren't a safety guy. Is that correct?
No,
When we talk,
no,
it's
not
not
at
like your
all.
history was, you weren't brought up
No, no, it
on
was
the
a black.
tools or anything like that.
No, it was a black box to me, to be honest with you. I never heard of the association before this. I had, my experiences in government and private sector were things dealing with technology, and then in government were much more with economic development, labor market development. So funding training organizations for people moving into various industries. So that was kind of more my exposure. And I had just left government looking for an opportunity, but kind of one of my last roles when I was in government, I was working a lot with industry, and it was a lot on their kind of the recruitment issues. And so I worked with the Construction Association proper with their CEO and the Home Builders Association, kind of built a lot of relationships and that way, and friendships and with people I was working with, and kind of appreciate it. And they say, well, you kind of get us. I'm like, okay, I get you. I don't know what that means exactly, other than drawing from my own family's experience and business and work. And but I was struggling in the government environment, to be frank with you.
Right. Right.
It's it's intrapreneurship and spontaneity. Those things sometimes can run in conflict with what you're trying to accomplish, even though it's brings great benefit. It's a little bit disruptive for that kind of environment. And I was kind of struggling. Is this really the place for me to stay? I feel like I should be doing more.
Hmm.
And so it was just like, you know what, I'm going to separate for this. Don't know what I'm going to do. But as that kind of happened, like I think within a day of that, I was getting phone calls from the people I had worked with on the industry side of things to support them. And they're saying, gosh, this is great. And then one day, or I shouldn't say one day, over a 4-day period, I got 3 phone calls. Um, and each one of them said, hey, this board is looking for a new leader. And I think you'd be great at this. I'm like, I don't know what is this? All right. And they said they named what it was, and I'm trying to look it up, and I have no idea what this is. Other than I understood the concept of risk management. I mean, I'd gone to business school. I understand that concept, and I understood some of the people side. And I said, well, I don't understand the technicals of safety, but as it turned out, that wasn't really what they were looking at. They weren't looking for another safety expert, so to speak. They were looking for someone that could lead some organizational change, some transformation. They wanted a different kind of relationship in terms of how this organization interacted with industry, interacted with government, interacted with other partners. And I thought, oh, this could be interesting.
Yeah.
And I needed to do something. And I'm like, you know what? I'm all in. Um, and so I found myself in a kind of a peculiar place. Didn't know what what the content was, but I got, hey, the stuff we're doing here is great. We need to get a different way to let people know what we're doing.
Right.
And so that started a journey of called the journey of craziness. Of we talked a little bit earlier about doing goofy videos or going on radio or trying to have engaging conversations with buyers of construction, the construction industry, and others that are impacted by construction, because it's just
Hmm.
everything we work and live in is had to be constructed at some point. So it was fairly relevant for most people in terms of the topic, and they can appreciate it because just about everybody's had somebody that they know, when either in their family or a friend that's had some sort of an injury that's kind of affected their life, and so it kind of made sense from that end, and
Hmm.
that's kind of how that happened, Dan.
It's funny when you get into safety, you start realizing that everybody knows somebody who's affected by it.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Like when I was training years ago with Shell, I remember I used to do a course called Pause, and I would ask every group. It was always groups of 20. How many people here know somebody who's been injured by a lawnmower? And every group, there was 2 or 3 hands that would go up, and it was always toes or eyes. Right. It was
Yeah.
either they cut their toes off, or
Yeah.
they poked their eyes with a branch. But usually it was toes. And it's like, well, how is it that we use this dangerous machine and no one plans for it?
Yeah, for
But
sure.
so all of the different things that you've done, we've talked earlier. You're a lifelong learner, and you just want more information. You want more conversation. You want more, and obviously that's part of why you're doing what you're doing now in terms of your ability to communicate. Um, what's the inspiration for you to be involved with so many things in so many ways? Like what underneath all of it?
um, Remember I said something about crazy or insane or something like that I mentioned earlier, but outside of that, I think all of the things have this integration, this level of here's an opportunity to lead something. And I've always been intrigued by leadership and kind of been involved with it from, being in high school. And the thing I think I really enjoyed about it was the ability to have an effect and to kind of have the levers to create an effect. And that's hard to do if you're not in a spot that, I'm going to say positive effect. If I'm not in the right spot to do it, it's really, really hard because you're always relying on somebody else to make the big move. And, it's kind of the seat where you can make things happen.
Mhm.
And that's been kind of at the center of all of it. And so along the way, it's like, well, gee, if I'm going to make things happen, I should be more effective with. And all these things, making things happen, involve people. Like the big things involve people. Um, And, nobody's really been there isn't a global champion of anything that could say that they did everything completely by themselves. Somebody helped them, whether behind the scenes or out in front or part of a team or part of an organization. And so all the things that we're dealing with, people and business processes, that I just got to try to keep learning how to be more effective with it. The more effective I could be with that, and the more ability I can teach others or help others do the same thing, the broader the effect of what we're trying to accomplish. It just becomes broader. And I think that's kind of what's driven me. I mean, there's probably a bit of when I talk about the insanity piece, is probably just an overall drivenness to try to succeed. But this is what I think is what I need to do to succeed. I think I need to help others and have an effect on other people. And you have to do something bigger than yourself. And that's been common in all those things. And so I have the opportunity to share with others, whether privately or in a broader group. It's like do something bigger than yourself, volunteer, give yourself to another organization for a period of time. You're going to help them and you're going to help yourself. So that's that. It's a complicated response, because for me it's a complicated question. But
Mhm.
I think that those elements I just described are kind of in the center of it.
Okay. So yeah, okay. I feel like the why is what I'm asking for. Like that's a lot,
Yeah,
and I get you.
yeah,
So, but because you really want to affect change in organizations, and you really want to affect positive change. And I mean, obviously, I've got a soft spot for you for the safety side of things. It's such I'm passionate about it. You're passionate about it now. I mean, you've been doing it for 10 years. Um, so why is it that you have this drive to? Yes, I mean, how many people do you know that don't get involved in volunteering? Right? Like, I mean, most people don't get involved in volunteering, right?
yeah,
You start getting into pockets of people that do it, and you
yeah.
start realizing, hey, I get something out of this for my heart, for my soul, for my faith, whatever, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
What do you think is the why for you?
Some of the big why, I've got this drivenness to, I got to do my best at something. Maybe it's a competitive element, but um, no, I want to succeed. If I could use the word succeed,
Okay.
and I want to be able to influence things, and I want to be able to, and it just, if you could use those skills for good, you can have a global effect. And that's kind of what I feel I need to do. I don't know. It's hard to describe, Dan, but every time I have this conversation with people, I see a common thread with that. Um,
Well, you want to get global because you're even doing, you have a podcast as well,
yeah,
right? So on
yeah,
top of everything else you're doing, tell me about,
yeah,
so yeah,
yeah,
you definitely want to get global. You're trying to get out. I mean, I have a podcast, obviously we're talking
yeah,
on it, but what's your
yeah.
podcast? Let's plug that
Well,
and then tell me about that, where it
yeah,
came from. And, you
yeah.
know,
I mean, it's got a fun title. It's called Bald Leadership, and um,
why? I don't
yeah.
understand.
You don't necessarily qualify, Dan. You got this beautiful cough.
You haven't seen the back of my head in this picture. I'll tell you that right now.
Well, it's yeah. We've had I don't know, just 30, 40 episodes out there with maybe about 30 different leaders at this point. But yeah, I've got a show called Bald Leadership, and really kind of started from conversations during the pandemic. It's like, how do we help each other as leaders? Because we're all struggling with this, with things about leadership. And the journey started for me when there was a job I wanted once. Um, and I'd interviewed for the job, and somehow, like, it was a pretty senior role. And that's like first time I've actually been an opportunity to be invited to interview for something like this. Well, I didn't get the job. I know I met with the board. I was the number two candidate. I kind of came out of the woodwork, and they were really surprised, but they were supportive. This is great, but I didn't get the job, and I was so disappointed. But the chair said, hey, if you want to go for coffee, I'll chat with you. Great. And so I we chatted, and he had said, Colin, there's this global shortage of leadership. I had a lot of respect for the chair because I knew some of the roles he was in. He said, there's a global shortage of leadership. And I had interpreted that to mean, oh, they're short of people that could fit these roles, which was maybe
Mhm.
part of what he was saying. But at the end of it, it was really that he was talking about there's a global shortage of the qualities and the essence of leadership, which it took me a long time to kind of figure that out. But
Yeah.
as I began to understand, it's like, oh, that's probably really what he meant. It started these conversations we'd have where it's like, you know what, we got to be honest with each other sometimes and say, hey, we're failing as leaders, or how do I get better? Or the fact is, hey, I'm so scared of this concept of leadership because I don't talk well, or I don't do this well or that well. Um, but the reality is that we can all lead. And so, having conversations with people, at one point I thought, I'm going to write a book about that first conversation I had with that chair, to maybe factors that people could benefit from. And I'm like, okay. I wrote the first chapter and I said, okay, now I need some content. And we said, well, why don't we record some of the conversations we're having, and we'll kind of make it fun, right? Just because we're asking people to be vulnerable. So you better have fun with it.
That's right.
And then maybe one day I'll put this down to paper, and we'll put a book together. Now I haven't done the book. I'm beginning to put some things together for blogs, but uh, as we're having these conversations, people who are in you know, um, pretty serious roles in this country that were, oh, I'd be happy to be on this show. I'd be happy to talk about some of my experiences. And, and they're opening up, and they're honestly funny. So we'd have very serious people getting into an environment where they're talking about things that were really funny, but we talk about things like failures, talk about things like, hey, what did I have to learn? And what am I learning? Talking about things that would encourage and uplift each other. And we said, okay, well, bald was because of clearly the head, but bald in terms of, you hear somebody saying, well, that's a bald face statement. It's like, we're not hiding anything. And
Right.
that's really the more powerful underlying element of this. Like, we got to try not to hide. Let's let our guards down. It's hard to do, but there's so much benefit to it. So, that's what that's turned into. And as you could tell, I like to talk, although I had some caffeine before I showed up here. So, um,
You're not the only
but
one, brother.
I like to hear other people and share their stories. I find it inspirational to me, and I go, gosh, when I grow up one day, I'd like to have more of that. I'd like to, um, I'd like to do some of the things that they've been able to do. And then when we hang up, they go, gee, I learned a lot from you too, Collin. I'm like, oh my gosh. So it's been this exchange of inspiration, exchange of ideas, exchange of approaches. Some people have different approaches than I would have, and I wouldn't necessarily use myself, but others who are listening could absolutely benefit from that. So that's um, that's where that whole bald concept came from.
And it's you and Cavis Reed, is that right?
Yeah, yeah. So, while I met Cavis a number of years back, we were both speaking at a conference together, and so we stayed in touch, and he was one of the people we spoke with during the pandemic. We were on Zoom and just touching base, and that's kind of where, like, hey, I've been thinking about doing this, and why don't we record a few of these? So, we would do some sessions together, and we get some really cool people on our show. And then and others would say, yeah, I'll come on. And so we've had athletes, business leaders, public policy makers, educators, young entrepreneurs. um, and so yeah, while Kavis and I will do shows and speaking things independently, this was kind of a neat place to come together and also interview other people. And we tend to laugh at each other a lot, and we're both bald,
Yeah, that's right.
so
That's
it
right.
works out.
You know, I I had Cavis he was an assistant coach for Hamilton when I was there in 2005. And what shocked me about Cavis was when we didn't have all that many conversations, because I was an offensive lineman and we're kind of snobs sometimes. We hang out, just the heavy guys hang out together. But Cavis came and he said, because I'd been traded from Edmonton, and Edmonton was doing very well at the time,
Right.
and he said, why is Edmonton doing so well and we're not? What is the difference? And he started asking me questions about their leadership. And I'd never had a coach And I had it later on. I was just getting to the age where people would ask me questions like that, right? I mean, I'd been in the league 6 or 7 years, and I'd won a Grey Cup and all that kind of stuff. But it was, to me, it was really neat to see a guy humble himself and actually say, "Hey, you know what? Like, you can make me better." As a player, it was one of the first times I'd seen it, right? And so it led to a couple good conversations, and I always respected him for that. So I'm interested in checking out the podcast
Yeah,
for
and
sure.
he's got the very thoughtful questions. I kind of just fill in gaps, and he says I think he's compared us to like Pat Summerall and John Madden, but he's kind of more the Madden, and I just kind of set it up. I'll say a couple quippy things, and then let him ask the intelligent questions, and and it works out. It works out. I can try to become a little more intelligent. I got a lot of work to do though.
I think, yeah, yeah. Well, lifelong learner, man. You always think you don't know enough, right?
Yeah.
It's always there's that underlying thing. Um, so we get back to safety here
Yeah.
and your role, and not to name names, we never name names, right? But if we're dealing with communication and helping companies get communication about not only the importance of safety, but even procedure, even whether it's permitting requirements, lockout, tagout, whatever, um, or something else. What failures have you seen? What failures do you think we're dealing with now that weren't there 10 years ago when you first started, or that you maybe didn't know about, and it's something that we could get better at as in the industry of construction?
Yeah, it's a great question. The Because of reality is when I started in this role or this business, most of the conversations were about, I call it the technical things about safety. Like, let's get everybody trained and everything should just be okay. Well, we'll train them in working in a confined space or working at a height, or hey, have you got the right code on your glasses? Is it an ANSI code or a Z this or right? It was very, to me, it sounded very technical, and everybody was really focused on that element of the physical things of safety. Have you got the right boots? Are you wearing them? And there was a shift that happened that I saw within, and I can probably really only speak to what I saw in Saskatchewan, particularly around the leadership level. I say it around my board, where there was this question that came from them, I would say probably 7 or 8 years ago. It's like, you know what? We're realizing the big gap isn't that people don't know what to do, because we can teach them what to do. What we don't have is enough leadership to get somebody to say, I'm going to hold you accountable for doing what you know you're supposed to do. We're either not leading ourselves or we're not leading others. And the evidence was showing that. I mean, when we would see injuries, I'd have discussions with people kind of in the government sector who's on the compliance side. They say, "Oh my goodness, so many times there was a lack of supervision, or there was the manager was absent, or there was a feeling that nobody really cared, and so therefore the things that we knew we were supposed to do, we weren't doing."
Mm-hmm.
So it became from, hey, we need to hammer down on compliance, which, okay, you need to have, we need to do things to kind of keep law and order. But there's this stuff, that the discretionary effort to say we're going to do something different, that had to change. And so we even changed as an organization. They gave us directive to change our motto for our organization. And I can't remember what our old motto was, but it became constructing safety leadership, with the emphasis on constructing leadership. And so the focus on can we get people engaged in supervisory programs or other things? And so that kind of drove us to myself to begin making partnerships with organizations that did work in preparing people to become supervisors. So we have polytechnics, some of the post-secondary education places, and built relationships there. They're, in some cases, they're using some of our content that we would deliver in the classroom. They're actually integrating it in some of their programs, which is a great thing. But along that, we got to learn about being a better supervisor and a better this and a better that. There was also this emergence of, the workplace is changing, and the emphasis on the soft skills, what people would call the soft skills, we need a greater emphasis on that, because
Mm-hmm.
in order to get people to stay motivated to work with you, they do have to feel you care. They do. That was that's a cultural dynamic that in every workplace, construction, of course, been viewed as being kind of the tougher of the industries, but all industries have faced this. So we need to understand how people tick. Intellectual intelligence was one thing, but the type of intelligence that dealt with emotions, that dealt with what makes people want to work closely with another leader, whether that be their humility, empathy, giving a vision, sharing a vision with people, motivating them to do it. And sometimes that's prodding, sometimes that's pulling, sometimes that's begging, but to have more of that, so that the effectiveness of the training of, hey, put on your hard hat, wear your PPE, watch for these hazards, we could be more effective at doing those kind of things, and it would stick. So when the supervisor would leave the room, people would continue to do what they were supposed to do, rather than, okay, the cop left the room, I'm just going to do what's a shortcut for me.
Right. And leading by example too. I mean, how many leaders do you see that if you're telling somebody to wear their safety goggles, safety glasses, you should be wearing them.
Yeah.
You should be wearing it when you're saying it, right? And that's
and
very simple, obviously. But what about how big of a factor is accountability, like a closed loop system? A closed loop system in this. If you're talking about your leadership, you're communicating something to the field. Do you know of any systems that people use, or that maybe allow them to come? Like, is it a person directly responsible? Is it a system? Obviously, technology is going to start really playing a part in this in terms of where I'm still one of these guys. So I've got my book.
You got paper over there?
I actually have paper in my office. Freaks people out.
Yeah.
So you've probably seen a lot of changes, I would think.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly the technology side that allows us to maybe observe or monitor things very differently than we could before, and tools that AI cameras, things that can support leaders is we've seen those changes. But when it comes to the effectiveness around accountabilities, there's often we hear the word accountable and we think, okay, sometimes it's in the context of punishment. Sometimes it's in the context of, okay, I'm going to haul you up in front of this court, whether it be my court or others, and we're going to pound on you for a few minutes. And why didn't you do this? And why didn't you do that? But accountability. What I'm finding with leaders that are really effective, and a lady by the name of Kim Scott, who wrote the book um, Radical Candor, and as well as Radical Respect. Uh, it's a common theme. It's the accountability is a two-way street. So I as the leader need to be accountable to the people that I'm working with, and it sometimes it starts in the smallest of ways. It's like, hey, I'm going to do things that are transparent for you. I want you to make sure that if I'm missing something, if you see my shoelaces untied, say, hey, boss, yeah, your shoelaces are undone. Great. Okay. Hey, I apologize. I messed up. Let me get that right, and show that. And the saying of, hey, listen, if you're going to admonish people, admonish them privately, praise them publicly. At the leadership level, sometimes that has to flip over a little bit, because people need to see your vulnerability. People say, hey, I made a mistake. I'm going to correct my mistake. And it gives an example to others that, hey, this is one of the ways I can be accountable. And,
right on.
I have a lot of discretion in what I do on a day-to-day basis, and how I manage my work, and maybe decisions on discretionary spending or those kinds of things. Well, I'm accountable to the board, but I'm also accountable to my team. I'm accountable to my executive assistant. And, we've had this kind of conversation that if you see me do something, give me one warning, but, say, hey, I noticed that you're missing something here. And the second warning goes to one or two people, my boss or my wife. And because when we're in roles like this, sometimes people don't tell you, they don't tell you in time to say, you're a bit off track, or something's happening here. Hey, boss, I noticed this, and have the courage to tell you so that you could self-correct. And so it's a bit of when we talk about accountability, I think it's a two-way street for people who are in the supervisory management and leadership roles, Dan.
That makes sense. It's interesting because, all the old stuff you read on management, one of the big issues is egos, obviously. And I think
Yeah,
it's egos all the time. But
yeah,
when you get to a point where you can actually, have enough humility to say, yeah, I'm
yeah,
going to need your help. Or I
yeah.
don't know everything. And sometimes I make mistakes. Right.
I left this piece of paper at the office, but it was my very first address to all of our staff when I started. Like I started on a Tuesday, and then I didn't meet everybody till like Wednesday or Thursday. And I think Thursday was the first time I actually talked to them. And I didn't have a speech, but I it didn't maybe come off the way that I intended it to, but I meant every word of it. It was,
Right.
folks, I have such a big ego that I'm willing to put it aside to get a bigger one later. And, when we talk about humility, sometimes it's putting aside what you've got so you can get something bigger later. Like there's actually, and it's not, oh, I just want to become more arrogant, but it's like, hey, putting myself in the right size. Darren Van Dongeren's got a book called Humble, but it's putting yourself in the right size for the moment, for a broader benefit. And by the way, you benefit, whether it doesn't necessarily be financial, doesn't necessarily mean to be in accolades, but there's a ton of benefits that come out of it. So yeah, being humble helps when people see you in practice, putting your ego aside when you could go and exercise your ego.
Hmm.
And you're not going to be perfect at, or I'm not going to be perfect at it. Maybe Dan will be
I
great
would.
at it,
Yeah. I pretty
but
fair
yeah, because
assessment. Yeah, not either.
we all have one, and we should have one. Like we need to be the right size for the moment, as like I said. But it's the willingness to put that aside. People can and do respond to that, and I said the bigger ego is to say, hey, I got it. We were able to have this effect. We can look back years later and say, look what we built together.
Yeah.
And in construction, and I know you've worked in safety and industrial sector. Like some of the proudest things. My dad used to be, before he passed. He was built homes, worked on projects, and we would drive through neighborhoods. He goes, yeah, that house there, I did the finishing in that thing, and that building over there, yeah, oh yeah, the Sky Dome, yeah, I did the finish work in the hotel, and you go by and you're proud of those things. It's almost like a child to you, and when you see what's happened, and that's kind of the same feeling that can happen. And maybe it's an age thing for me, but
Yeah.
but when you look back and say, look what we did to look what we built, and there's evidence of it, and people are changed, and now people are living in that home, and they can enjoy that home, and it gives them protection, and those kinds of things are. I think we have, as leaders, we have to inspire ourselves and inspire others with that, to say, hey, there's an end game here, and it's not just about me or about this widget or just about you. And yes, we got to pay bills, and yes, we got to put food in our bellies and braces on our kids' teeth. But along the way, we can have all this other stuff that really makes us happy and excited about being doing what we're doing.
But it starts with humility. It's interesting because you like all the conversation about humility. It reminded me of a quote by not a quote, an idea by Jordan Peterson, and his
Mm, yeah,
his and it's biblical because he gets a lot of
yeah,
his stuff from the Bible. But it's that every time you put aside something in yourself that needs to be corrected. So if you're humbled by somebody and you say, well, I've got to fix that, it's like a little death. If you think about the biblical side of it, of course, becoming a Christian is considered a
right,
death, right? The death
right,
of your old self. But you see it, and actually understanding it as a young man, I didn't get any of this stuff. I didn't even think about it, right? I just played football and had fun. But when you give something up, when you give that, so I have to have humility here, and I've got to fix that. Whether I've got to get up earlier, or I've got to study more, or I've got to whatever it is, it's that little death, and it's the death of yourself that you don't really want to let go of. And then when that person's gone, you're like, hey, it's really good that person's gone because this new guy's a
yeah,
little bit better.
yeah,
So yeah, through
yeah.
leadership, yeah, that's got to be. I mean, with all the roles you've had, I'm sure you've had many little deaths.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes I feel like it's like every I came home and said I died a little bit more today, but you know,
Yeah.
but to
Without a
me,
negative connotation on
yeah.
it. I mean, that's not, obviously that's not what I'm saying, but it's
But you are right. Like there are moments, and I mean, I just I just had a couple is just this week. I'm reflecting on the week here and conversations where quietly I I can correct this. I could change this, which hopefully means I'm different tomorrow, and that piece that I got to work on hopefully is less of me in the future. And yes, in that sense, yeah, those cells have died and new ones are coming in. So, I mean, you've done a lot of stuff in strength and fitness. And so I over the years, and, you talk about cell renewal that happens, over a course of days, right? And there's periodization that goes with that. But if you do the right things today, those new cells that come in play tomorrow or in the next 90, 180 days, they're going to be demonstrably different. And the ones that die there's going to be fewer of them. And so that's how and why we get stronger. That's how and why we get
yeah,
smarter if we put the work in. And that's the difference. You got to put the work in. And that's kind of accepting that acceptance. Okay, that part of me I have to have less of that. I'm going to have to let that part die. And that lesson may have to happen quite a few times, which is why we practice and do reps. And it's like it doesn't all come at once. And can you get demonstrable change in a really short period? Sure, you can. But the really big, long lasting stuff, it takes years to work at it. And
yes.
that's, I realize this kind of sounds like, oh, this is really conceptual or you're talking spiritual. It's like, yeah, we're kind of talking all of that at
Well, if you
once.
take that from spiritual to personal to organizational,
Yeah.
how many little deaths have to happen within an organization? You think about bad safety culture
Oh,
from the past,
yeah.
right? Like what have you seen that you've seen leave? Have you seen anything leave, like bad safety culture, something that from whether it's an organization or from the entire industry? Like what have you seen that's gone that you're
Well,
happy it's gone?
well, what I could say is that I would see a lot less of it, right? When I say less of it, it's like, gosh, people would look at it as something as strange if it emerged,
Yes.
right? And they go, that that is not that's not a normal leadership style. I say, hey, we're just going to lock you in this room, and when you get the work done, I'll unlock the door. Well, you know what? There was a time that would happen, you know, and that's not a normal thing anymore.
Not now.
Not only is it not legal, but there's people that go, gosh, that would seem strange, right? And it would just be a strange thing to happen. Does it happen? I know it does, because sometimes the worst of us can come out in our human consciousness, but it's not normal anymore. And so to put people into knowingly putting people into places where the likelihood of them coming out alive or coming out undamaged is very low. That's not likely to happen. We don't send people down into mining situations with the way that we used to, right? Like we take
Yeah.
steps. So even the sociopaths of us recognize, hey, we got to do some things here that are better than the way that we used to. When we just say, hey,
Whether it's because of legislation or actual growth. I mean, the
right,
sociopaths, certainly there are people that don't care,
yeah, and some of
but
that is it becomes a societal pressure if it's not a legal pressure. It's like, yeah, I'm not going to send
mhm.
this person down a mine shaft with a stick of dynamite and a match and saying, well, hey, stick it in there, light it, and just run as far away as you can from it. That's not a normal thing to do. But that was a normal thing at one point,
Yeah,
right?
that's right.
The likelihood of people coming out was pretty low. So a lot of people died almost every day. We've built bridges where people have or dams, I'm sorry, where we're not sure if there's people in that concrete today.
Yeah.
In
Well, they
North
used to
America.
build. They used to budget for death. They
Yeah,
budget this project has 1 million man hours. We know that every 1 million man hours we're going to have 3 people die. So
yeah,
what's the budget to take care of their families? And
yeah,
it's like you look at it now, that would be unacceptable. You know.
yeah. That's just an unacceptable approach, right?
Yeah.
And so those are things that are, well, okay, but I'm looking for something specific, Colin. Well, we could do that, but people will not accept what we used to accept before,
Yeah.
and that is a change. And the things that I see with young people coming into the industry now, are they making the same mistakes that other people? Yeah, they're making the mistakes, but they're also much more aware that that's not really an acceptable activity in some cases. Now, some of that is knowledge, some is recognizing hazards. Some of those things are things that require some learning. But the whole idea that, yeah, it's normal to just allow somebody to step into a machine that's running at full tilt, and we expect you to go and do that. That's not a normal thing anymore.
No, that's right. We've evolved, and the industries have evolved, and people.
Yeah,
And maybe it's just because we're getting older too, right? Because when I was a kid, I remember people, and I remember joking about the phrase, "Whose problem is that not?" Well, it's not my problem,
yeah,
right? And those days are, well, have I had any effect on that? Like, what have
yeah,
I done or not done to put that situation in place, right? Whether it's an idea in somebody's head or anything else, right?
yeah. But I think there are problems. I'm going to say more emerging problems, and you're at least the emergence of our awareness is now emerging about problems that we never had the time for or thought of in terms of safety in the past, right? We
Mm-hmm.
talk about psychological health and as being one of those things. There were psychologically unhealthy people in those environments. We probably just didn't pay a lot of attention to it. We had suicide rates, and particularly in construction, and higher amongst men, higher in construction than most other in industries. But we didn't. The same attention wasn't on it. I think societally we've become much more aware, particularly coming out of the pandemic, and when people have been isolated for periods of time, we've seen some, like I would say, that a gross effect on society, and we've seen that with the tools that are available to become isolated, and whether it be through our social media, and we're getting engineered messages coming to us individually that's going to be different than our neighbors, and we don't have kind of the common experience anymore. It can create an isolating environment, and so suddenly now as leaders we're seeing the effect of that. We're seeing a whole generation that is they grew up they as children with iPhones in their hands,
Yes.
right?
And we
Like an
had no idea
entire
what that was going to do
generation.
to them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when you and I were growing up, well, a phone that you played with all the time, like that didn't exist. We're lucky if we had a little TV in our house.
That's
And
right.
when we used to walk uphill on glass both ways and all that kind of stuff, right? Like it
But it was
was,
better.
yeah,
The glass wasn't that sharp, man. The glass
yeah,
wasn't that sharp. Like, it was
yeah,
better. It was such a great way. I love our generation of the '80s was the best. I don't care what
yeah,
anybody says.
yeah.
It's
And so we were used to being outside and having kind of forced engagement with each other.
yeah,
I saw it, and other leaders see it, where after the pandemic and people trying to get them back together in a workplace to be functional together, something happened, right?
something
And
happened,
it
certainly.
and I think that creates a whole new set of safety challenges that can play out. And it's the dysfunction of a team often is a precursor to a major catastrophe. We've seen it, whether it's a space shuttle Columbia, whether it's the collapse of a bridge, whether it's
Titanic.
all of these things.
Yeah,
That is the precursor, and so that's an area that we need to be aware of. We may not have felt all the effects yet, but we've got to be aware of it so we could try to do something. And it's the big challenge. I don't have a quick answer for you on it, but it is the challenge that we have to continue to learn how to deal with that, and in some ways it's kind of at a global scale.
yeah. I think it speaks to the importance of actually getting people together personally. Like, I just from my own experience with COVID. As a keynote speaker, obviously business slowed down a little bit, right?
Yeah, yeah,
you know and so now I was doing keynotes virtually, and that's fine. I can do them, but that first black screen I talked to, where I was just talking to myself, it starts getting a little weird about 25 minutes in, right?
well,
And now what are you going to do? It gets to the point, well, what do you do after, when you've got to come back out and see people? And for me, it was a relief, like actually seeing reactions, because I feed off of that. That's just part of why
yeah,
I do what I do. But I mean, if you're not used to people at all anymore, and you're not, you're a bit of an introvert, and you maybe spend more time on your phone, or not that I've got my vices too, right?
Yeah.
But like you can just see how people are struggling, and you can see how, and also we have people have access to you all the time. So if your kids are in trouble, you find out right now.
Yeah.
If you get, it's not like you have to wait to get home for your phone calls.
That
So
is right.
the whole world's changed in crazy ways.
A friend of mine, who we've been on a couple of boards together, and he has a wonderful business. And in the midst of this pandemic, we'd had a call. I can't remember if it was by phone or by Zoom, but he said, Colin, like the extroverts are losing their minds, and the introverts become more introverted. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. And being I'm an introvert myself, so I would be quite happy being locked up in my house for weeks on end, even though the things that I do, it wouldn't make sense for it, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
but I would be quite comfortable to sit in this little box where we see each other on the screen. And I think this technology has been a wonderful thing because it's allowing us, you and I, to have a conversation that we
Yeah.
would never have. There's just no way we would have had it, prior to this. But the other side of this is that we do need connection, and we're wired that way to have connection, and that's how teams actually function really well. And so having an extreme lack of it, and then when I entirely have to rely on just on this, like Dan, I don't know if you're wearing pants or what color pants. You don't need to stand up, but the fact
And wear
is that
pants.
this is the only window I have to your soul right now, is what I'm seeing
Yeah.
in a 22-inch or 28-inch screen or something, and that has a downside to it. And I had an experience like that with an executive that I did not know how much was going on inside of him. Um, and it wasn't good. Because we just didn't have the normal, what I would consider the normal interactions that we used to have, where we would see each other physically. Every couple of weeks we'd meet, we'd have a conversation. And so you could tell the subtle things, right? Maybe the way they walked, maybe the way but anybody could put on a show for 20 or 30 minutes or an hour on this little screen where,
Yeah.
where the disaster might be happening outside of the parameters of the screen, but you never see it, but they're feeling it. And, that's that's a hard thing. So we have to become better at and work really hard at digging deeper, even though we only have this little window to work with, the little window that I see you with. I've got to find ways in my conversations. I've got to have questions that I can ask, and I need to be able to try to, exude the empathy and try to get understanding much more rapidly than I ever used to. And and then continue to find ways to get some sort of a, eyeball to eyeball interaction, and we had the opportunity to meet in person for the very first time. It's like, hey, this is great, this supplements that. But as
Yes.
you know, there's food, and then there's supplements, and you just can't live off of bottles of vitamins. You actually need to have food. And I think that physical, being in the same room, seeing eyeball to eyeball, all the emotional pieces that come out, the all of that is part of the food that our spirits need to be able to say, hey, let's function and team up and do this together.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it is nice. The technology is amazing. It really is, and I don't complain about it as much as I used to, because now I'm actually taking part in it. But there's nothing like sitting across from somebody and breaking bread.
Yeah.
There's nothing like going to a group of people that you have something in common with, and for me it's church, right? Going to
Yeah.
church and experiencing something with people, and then knowing that there's love in the room and that we're all going in the same direction,
Right.
right? It's that's, I think, human, right? So yeah, we I don't think we're going to lose that. I used to worry, well, maybe everybody's just going to start staying home, like halfway through COVID. We keep the liquor stores open and everybody
Yeah.
stays
Yeah.
home.
It'll just be cocoons everywhere. Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
what advice do you have for those youngsters that are coming up into the industry of construction, who are coming out of, whether it's coming out of a trade school, or or an apprenticeship, and they're getting ready to, to start working towards a career?
Yeah, great. That is a great question. I think, part of my reflections on kind of coming up the opportunities that I had that are might be a little less so for somebody coming out is the ability to find, and you're going to have to be really good at seeking out mentors, somebody who will take the time with you to not just show you what to do, but that you could learn from. Um, because there's one thing to know the tactical elements, but all the other pieces that come to making you a really good tradesperson or, um, my dad was a carpenter, and there was somebody who apprenticed him, but it was also somebody he built a relationship with and learned a lot of other things from as well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there's, I said that there's a global shortage of leadership. There's a shortage of those people out there, and we have to be much more deliberate about finding somebody and being open to listening to what they have to say. Um, Even if 99% of it you completely disagree with, there's stuff in there that's going to be useful for you. To be open to correction, if you want to call it that. But to say, hey, you know what? Here's an opportunity to get a little bit better at something you could reflect on. I, I think that's a challenge because there's fewer people. We're trying to close a gap where we've had a lot of people retiring who've got a lot of
Mm-hmm.
experience, and we got a bunch of people coming in trying to fill the gap, and there's not a lot of time for the overlap that we used to see much more of. There's just fewer people, and so you kind of have to compete for that. I'm going to say that attention, that time, and and I encourage people to do that. It's just I know a lot of us want somebody to show us everything, and it may not be possible without you kind of stepping out first. So that's more of a statement of encouragement than it is anything else. I encourage you to do that. You will benefit from it. Um, and I guess the
That's a
second part of it,
huge concept that I haven't heard much of, or any of. Like, to actually go, I mean, obviously seek a mentorship, you seek mentors, and that's something that as an older guy you figure out,
yeah,
but to actually realize that these young guys are going to have to compete for their mentors. They're going to have
yeah,
to. It's different than when we were coming up. Like the mentors showed up, and there was always a few of them, and they were always talking.
yeah. They're
Right?
always around. Yeah,
Yeah, they're always around.
and I'm not saying they aren't around. I'm just saying you're probably going to have to make a lot more effort to get to them.
Yeah.
Because guess what? They're now busier than ever.
Hmm.
That's just kind of their reality. But Dan, without them, we do not get good. Like, there was a time when we would, and I remember hearing it's like, hey, get smart in school, and that's all you need. Well, that is not all you need. Like
No.
that is not all you need, and there was probably an over reliance on that. You know, get a good education, get a good job, without the part of the mentorship. It was just kind of it was just something that, oh, you're going to get it. I think it's a bit of a challenge now, and so if there's a spot to be very aware of and be more deliberate about, is to seek that out. And it's for yourself. It's also for others, but recognizing the world is different than it used to be for you and me, Dan. Like it was, I'm going to say back in the day, there was the concept of the CEO was the smartest person in the whole organization. They knew everything. Well,
Hmm.
that is not the case today because you're dealing with things on a global level. The CEO now has to be more of a master facilitator of all that. They're not going to know everything. There's no way to know that and still be competitive. You just can't because information is changing so rapidly. So you have to learn these other skills. And the dynamics for what we do today, yeah, we are competing globally, for talent and other things. And so, as a young person coming up through things, don't be afraid to seek people out. And you're going to have to keep trying. It may not be easy. I shouldn't say it may not.
Yeah.
It won't be easy. But keep doing it. Keep doing it, and try to make it as easy as possible for the mentor. I had people who would give me second and third and 15th chances, and I keep messing up. And, I don't know if I can do that today. you
Yeah.
know, and it's like, hey, if I didn't listen to you the last 10 times, there's somebody else who will. And, and so that's part of what I mean about don't take it for granted.
Hmm.
Be deliberate about it. And it's going to be a lot more fun for you because you're going to build a relation. Mentorship is about a relationship. And when you find them, cherish them, invest in that relationship, and don't make it transactional. Make it a true relationship, and you're gonna do great. You're gonna learn stuff. You're gonna have fun doing it. You're gonna be more creative. You're gonna be able to get innovation because that's where innovation comes from, is the sharing of ideas and thoughts and relationships. So I connect the personal to the broader business environment. And I know I sound like a chamber person again now, or a chamber of commerce person, but that is true, right? It is true at the personal level and how it has impact on the broader picture, and then your personal satisfaction that comes out of that. Um, Sometimes it's hard to measure. A lot of it is stuff that you can't measure with a calculator or a spreadsheet.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think for the mentors too, they, I know in football especially, that's my biggest experience with this. You by the end of my career at 13 years, you wanted to pass some stuff along. Like I knew it was coming to an end, right?
Yeah,
And so I
yeah,
was brought into Calgary to be a leader, offensive lineman who wasn't necessarily going to make it through the year, kind of thing, right? And
yeah,
it's like, well, that's where you want to pass on to guys, how to live and how to live within the game and what's actually expected in interviews and I look back and wish I would have done a better job in certain situations. But the
oh,
reality is,
yeah.
I think that there's a lot of people that, in the industry, especially construction, manufacturing, these high up jobs that they want to give. Um, and, obviously a lot of them do. Right. So thankful.
Yeah, I mean, we have a fancy word like we call legacy, and that is, I guess that kind of captures it. But there is a kind of a switch. It's like, hey, I've it's gone from what I can do to what I can give, and
Yeah.
sometimes I don't know if the switch just comes on, or one day you realize it's like, I'm in a point in my role here in the organization, and with the SCSA, and where my emphasis, and I've had lots of conversations with the board, is like, I want to coach others to do what I've learned,
Hmm.
and hopefully do it better than how I did, because I've been pretty hard headed in some areas, right? Um, and so it's a personal thing. Hey, I got to learn something, and then I got to teach something, and there's a satisfaction watching somebody who struggled with some, all of a sudden they can do it. I used to be able to ride
Yes.
my bike really well, and then when I saw my kid being able to ride their bike, and I can let go of the seat and watch them, there isn't a prouder moment, right?
No,
Like
it's true.
and that's kind of the feeling that you get. And it sounds a little like grandpa-ish or something, but it's a cool feeling to see people kind of, they learn something and now they're doing it a bit themselves, and you go, man, I was a part of that. And
Yeah.
that's the difference between leading for yourself and leading with a purpose. And that there's a completely different feeling that comes out of it, and different set of rewards. And if you do that well enough, like, don't worry, you're going to get your rewards. But if you focus on the right things, which you and I've just been talking about, um, there's a whole package of things, that benefits that come out of it, that I think if we learn how to do it collectively, we become more competitive as an industry. Um, we don't have all this loss of treasure and blood, the way that we've seen in the past. We become more competitive globally, and so I think those are important things for, from an economic perspective, but also from a society perspective. And that society might be right in your own household. Somebody coming home and they don't have cuts and bruises and broken bones and emotional damage because of stuff that they could have done differently where they were working.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because a lot of these conversations I'm having now come back to service. And this one just did it again, and it came out of nowhere, right? Came out just asked you that question, but it is service. It's service of others, and we learn it from the greatest example. But you realize that when you're actually in service of others in any industry, you win.
Yeah.
You just win. You're
Yeah.
not, if you're not out for, some sort of malicious intent, you're winning, right? So, okay, I got one more question for you. How many?
Okay.
So you got one. How many kids do you have? Two kids? Is that right?
I got
Two boys. And how
two
old are they?
boys. Our oldest is 25, and the next one's 21.
Oh wow.
Yeah,
Okay,
two
so
boys.
most of the formation's done. So
Yeah,
when they out of the house yet?
I got one out of the house. One that's I'm not sure when he's going. Like I'm not exactly eager for them to necessarily just leave,
No, no,
but
those days are over. I want my
yeah,
daughter to stay as long as she can.
yeah. I kind of like, hey, I'm good with him being around, but I understand. Um, and yeah, they're just he's right on the he's working now, and what's fun is that they're working together. They've got a business they've been working on together. So um, but yeah, I could see it coming.
That's awesome.
I
So
could
when
see it
they
coming.
leave, what three rules would you have them follow? Maybe it's rules you wish you had, you wish your dad told you, or what three things would you like them to make sure they put as concrete in their life?
Well, I think there's a strong element of their ongoing personal development. Like, don't stop investing in yourself. You are the biggest return on investment you could possibly have. And I mean that from not just okay, continue to get educated, but continue to be open to learning. Continue to be open to learning things in your spiritual life and in your relationships. And as you may have families yourselves, and be open to learning, because if you say, well, things come to you naturally, well, okay, but not everything comes to you naturally. And so, I mean, I think that would be one of them. The second one is find some disciplines and work at it. Just work at it. There is a certain joy that comes out of finding yourself that being disciplined. And I use the word volunteer. That's probably an easy way to say it, but give yourself to others. Find a way to do it. It doesn't have to be, oh, Collin, you've been on 15 different boards and some of their being. It's like, okay, that might be it, but sometimes it's just phoning down to your local United Way and saying, who needs help? Like, this is what I
Mm-hmm.
can do, I think. Let me come down and, scoop a bowl of soup, a couple hours a week, or, or something. And through that, it's going to lead to other relationships. It's going to lead to understanding your community better, how you can become more effective in it. It may turn into business relationships, but do those things. It'll change you, and it'll change people around you. That's I I don't know how that just rolled off the tongue there, but I think those
That's
are
great.
probably the three big ones.
Well, we'll make sure we get a clip of these three for them so we can send it to them where they live. Because
Okay.
sometimes they don't listen right when we're talking. I don't know if you know.
Yeah, and I'm like, I maybe I got it subliminally, but like my folks didn't sit me down and say that to me that way.
No.
I think they demonstrated it, and I was fortunate to kind of see enough of it that going, maybe I should be doing some of that.
Yeah.
Um, I realized that for me, there were times as a father I wasn't as explicit in the expectations as I probably could have and should have been, and so I'm trying to become more precise in the coaching I could give to my kids today. And
Yeah.
from where we are today, um and that's just that's been a part of learning for me as a dad, and maybe one day as a grandpa. And even though that makes my hair go gray, whatever you can't see there, but makes my beard go gray when it grows. But I those are kind of they're more reflections than anything else, Dan.
I asked that question because I know how fleeting time is with kids. There's a couple kids that I don't get to talk to very much, and
Yeah,
it's just the moments that you get to talk to them. You got to
yeah,
give them the diamonds you got, because you've got the years of experience ahead of you or behind you rather. You got it. I just think I just love that question.
No,
I
you're
love
right.
asking it. So
It is fleeting. I don't have, I don't have time with them like used to either, and,
no,
when you're sitting the long hours watching them play soccer and you're going, I'm just getting eaten by mosquitoes here. And, you wish for those days back.
yeah, yeah,
And, so the little bits you can, and even if it's just simply when you see them and you hug them, you just kind of hold them a little bit longer, right? And yeah, it might embarrass them, but you just hold them, and that's yeah. I find myself doing that with the little bits of time, slivers of time now. I guess I get with them, and um, yeah, it's not that I'm sitting there regretting things, but I'm like, man, I could have, would have, should have, whatever that saying is. So I got to work with what I got now, and
yeah. Of course, just like all of us, I was just thinking. I don't remember the last time I held my daughter's hands. Like the last time I held their hands walking down the street, across the street.
right, right,
I remember doing it all the time, and then
yeah,
one day it just stopped. And it's like, oh, that's done now.
yeah,
You know, it's
yeah.
funny. Anyway,
Yeah.
I really appreciate the conversation, and you've given me so
Oh,
much great information, and
like it's I say these are cathartic conversations at times, but no, I really appreciate you inviting me to do this, and kind of giving a long form to kind of expand on thoughts. And
is there anything you would like to add to put out there?
no, I just maybe just a recap of things like you know humility, empathy, giving, inspiring others. A number of things that are kind of put in the there's an author, Canadian author, Craig Dowd, and he lives in your province, and that we talk about a lot. Like they're very, very simple things, and if we could, I just encourage people go back to those simple things, and that's probably going to make all the difference in the world for whatever that you're doing, swinging a hammer or leading a team of 4 or 5 people in your shop, or um, just helping in your family or community.
Awesome. You've been awesome today, Colin. Thank you so much.
Oh, thanks again, Dan.
Well, thanks for joining me on the bridge. I hope you got a lot out of that. If you did, if you liked it, if you didn't like it, send us some comments. Do what you want. Press subscribe, hit the bell, do the thing and the zap and the zippity zoo. Do all that stuff. I'd love to hear from you. Take care.